You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia. And you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today we are looking at buy low players for fantasy basketball leagues. Actually, scratch that. I'm wrong. That was yesterday. We are looking at sell high players for fantasy basketball leagues. Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
Not a great start to the show, but before we do get into talking about the sell high guys, just a quick RIP to former NBA Commissioner David Stern, who passed away today at the age of 77 after a brain hemorrhage. He'd been in the hospital for 3 weeks. It obviously looked pretty grim at that time. Stern was obviously a huge part of the NBA in its massive growth phase through the 80s and 90s, and large portions of that growth can be directly attributed to him, of course, along with the players during that time frame. But Stern will always go down as a legend of the sport and of the league. So condolences go out to him, obviously to his family, to the wider NBA community, and everybody who has ever met and interacted with Commissioner Stern. Let's now talk, though, about sell high players. In fantasy basketball, we're looking at their performances over the last couple of weeks. One of the guys I've got, again, not an exhaustive list, not a list that's in order. There are other guys who might be sell high. You might not be selling these guys high. And again, if you're selling them high, it's not about selling them at what their value might be later on in the season. It's about trying to extract value. And if you can't do it, oh well, you keep them and you ride it out. That is super important. So when I say a buy low guy or a drop guy or a waiver wire guy or a sell high guy, that doesn't explicitly mean you have to absolutely do this, because if you push too hard in those situations, you will end up losing, and that goes for any sort of transaction. So the first guy I want to talk about here, LaMarcus Aldridge of the San Antonio Spurs over the last 2 weeks. He is the 5th ranked player. That is obviously really good. He started banging in some threes, 1.7 per game, 22 and 9. But the reason he is up this high is he's averaging 2.5 blocks per game. He's shooting 56% from the field, and he's shooting 92% from the line. Now, he doesn't get to the line all that often, only 2 attempts per game, but that is still a huge positive. But that field goal percentage and those block numbers for Aldridge has vaulted him right up the ranking list. He's 26th overall on the season. But that block number and that field goal percentage is way above what he's done all throughout the year, as is those 3-point numbers, which are double what he has averaged over the season. So I see him more settling into a 30 to 40 type rank for the rest of the year, not as a top 10 or top 5 guy where he currently sits. Nobody is giving you back a top 5 player in return. We're aware of that. But you might get a top 25 sort of a guy, a top 20 sort of a player back. And that's a deal I absolutely would do. Look for someone who's maybe struggling a little bit as they return from an injury/PED suspension. DeAndre Ayton, I would take Ayton over Aldridge in those situations. I'd feel pretty good about it. But that's the sort of deal that you can probably swing, and you might actually be able to get Aldridge for Ayton plus something else. That's a possibility. So that's something I would look at doing. The next guy, it's not because I necessarily think his form is unsustainable, but Kyle Lowry is the 10th ranked player over the last 2 weeks. He is averaging 24.5 points, 5 rebounds and 8 assists. Nothing crazy there. 1.1 steals, 3.8 triples. A little higher on the threes, but nothing too crazy. 46% from the field, 86% from the line on 6 attempts. Nothing crazy, but there's a few things. Pascal Siakam returning is going to have an impact on his usage. Marcus Aldridge, probably not as much. That might have an impact on his assists. Norm Powell, he's a usage guy as well. But the important factor here is Kyle Lowry is averaging 40 minutes a game over the last 8 games. He is not young. He's going to turn 34 in a couple of months' time. He has a history of big minute totals causing deleterious effects on his production. So if you can get out of Lowry at any point for a top 20, top 25 type of a guy, I would absolutely be looking to do it, because and it might not happen, but I am absolutely shit scared of an injury coming and ruining the season for anyone who has Lowry on their team. My mate, Ravishing Rick Rubio, is the 14th ranked player over the last 2 weeks. 19, 4, and 8.5 1.2 steals. But why is he doing it? Well, he's shooting 57% from the field. And if you know Rick Rubio, you know that's not going to continue. 63% on twos, 44% on threes. He's been fantastic this season, the 49th best player. I think he can continue that sort of a level. He can't continue top 14 because that shooting is going to drop off. So, again, you're never getting a top 14 guy back, but can you get a top 25 player? Can you get a top 30 player? Maybe. That's what you should be looking at. Because these sort of numbers from him, that shooting's going to have a stretch of 30% shooting for a week or two, and he's going to fall into the 90s or into the hundreds. But at the moment, his level of production is unsustainable. This one might be a little bit controversial, but Richaun Holmes, I think, is a bit of a sell high player. Now, let's get this straight. If Richaun Holmes is on any of your waiver wires, you need to add him immediately. You've needed to add him immediately for the last 2 months. But will he continue to be the 19th ranked player? I think he's going to play around 30 minutes a night. We had that nonsense from Walton of limiting him to 26 minutes a night when he is the Kings' best player. De'Aaron Fox might have an argument there, but this season there is no argument. It has been Holmes as their best player. So they've got to play him 30 plus minutes. But what he is doing over these last 2 weeks in particular is ridiculous. 68% from the field, by far a career high and better than he's done so far this year. But most importantly, 95% from the free throw line. This bloke shot 73 last year, 66 the year before that, 70 the year before that, 69 the year before that.
Giggity!
Nobody is a 95% free throw shooter. And I don't care how many improvements he's made. He's at 83% on the season, which is obviously awesome. Like, you're not staying at 95. Is there a real chance he goes back and is a 77% guy? There's a chance. Or maybe it's not a great chance, but there's a possibility. But that's going to drop. When your true shooting is 72%, which is ridiculously high, and that is fueling your fantasy value, your two best categories pretty much. Well, number one is field goal percentage for Holmes. It's 3 times the impact of any other category that he has. Then it's rebounds and free throws right next to each other. So there are a lot of things that he is doing here that are completely out from career norms from Holmes. The best rebounds per 36 of his career, highest field goal percentage, highest free throw percentage, all that stuff. So I think there is a real chance that he... And again, we're doing this without Bagley, who's going to have somewhat of an impact. Now, Holmes isn't a usage guy. That's got nothing to do with it. It's more that will this level of efficiency, which is wildly high even for his improved numbers this season, continue? I have significant doubts about that. Kevin Love, 28th ranked player over the last 2 weeks. He can still get it done. 19 and 11, almost 4 assists, 49 and 78. But the risk of injury with him is high. The trade situation with him is significant. Now, I think you could make an argument either way with the trade that it might be better for him to go to a competitive team because he'll have less likelihood of getting blown out and having limited minutes and sitting out for not non-existent injuries but limited impact type injuries. Whereas in Cleveland, he might have more usage, but there'll be games where he plays 25 minutes or his back's a little bit sore. There's no point in pushing it and he's disengaged. So I think it could work either way with the trade. But it's more and we don't know if a trade's going to happen. The report came out today that it's looking increasingly more likely that it could get done. I do think there is a chance that happens with Love, but it won't be for there's 6 weeks until the trade deadline. We're obviously going to be pushing closer to the trade deadline for that. But at this level of production, with the injury risk, he could get injured at any point in the next 6 weeks. With ups and downs happening, if you want to and if he goes to another team, will he ever be better than what he currently is now as a top 30 guy? Will he be top 40, top 50 when he gets traded? I think that's probably more the realistic expectation. So if you can get one of those guys back with a little bit more reliability behind them, that's what I'd be trying to do because there's just so much uncertainty with Kevin Love. The next guy we look at, Jingling Joe Ingles, of course. He's rolling, the 40th ranked player over the last 2 weeks, averaging 18, 5, and 5, and shooting 54%. Now, he was shooting horribly at the beginning of the season. It has rebounded in the other direction. It's going to come back into the middle. Conley's going to come back. The 35 minutes a game are going to reduce. The usage is going to reduce. I don't think he moves back to a bench role, and he needs to be rostered in all leagues after starting out horribly. But this sort of level of production from Ingles, even if you look at him, what he did last year as a top 60, top 65 guy, I don't think that's a realistic expectation. So if you can get someone at a better rank than that from him as we move forward, I think that's a reasonable thing to try and do. Alec Burks is a player who is a must-roster player if he's on a waiver wire, but I also think if you can get any sort of top 80 value for him back in a trade, you do it. He's the 61st ranked player over the last 2 weeks, averaging 18, 4, and 3.5 with 2 steals, and I think he's a prime candidate to get traded. And unlike Kevin Love, if he goes off this Warriors team, he doesn't just go into a solid role. Now, if Love gets traded from the Cavs, he's good enough to hit. He's in another role where he's a starter and plays 30 minutes. That won't necessarily be the case for Burks. He might move into a 22-minute bench role. So any sort of value you can get of him as a top 80, even top 100 guy for Burks at this point, they're going to try and clear space for Damian Lee to be on the roster. And the one that absolutely sticks out like dog's balls is trading Alec Burks. So I would be trying to add him off your waiver wires, absolutely. Try and trade him, but don't trade him for Colin Sexton or some nonsense that's outside the top 120. Just roll with Burks, and then if he gets traded, you can cut him. But if you can get a solid guy back around that area, then by all means, that is what you should be exploring. Julius Randle has played so much better under Mike Miller, playing with an actual offense, with real schemes and things that make more sense than whatever nonsense your mate Fizdale was doing. I also don't think that Randle is the 29th best player in fantasy, which he has been over the last 5 games, averaging 26 points per game with 9 rebounds. Now, can he average 9 rebounds a game? Of course he can. But 50% from the field, 85% from the line, and 39% from 3 on good volume. These are not things that go with Julius Randle. The 50% from the field, sure, he can be a relatively efficient scorer, but he's not a good free throw shooter usually. He's not a high volume and good 3-point shooter usually. So there is some room for him to fall down. He's still not getting defensive numbers. We've seen some of the assist numbers drop off because he's not in that spot in the offense anymore. So he's, I think, a real one that we can look at. Now, he's 122nd ranked player over the course of the season. Again, because if you're still out here saying it wasn't Fizdale's fault, you're blind. That's why he's so poor, because he was just miscast. But he's good in this spot. But people really believe in Julius Randle, or they did before this season anyway, and they might be turned back into believing into him. Oh man, no, he's good. It was just Fizdale, which is partially true. I just don't think he's this good. He's not a 2.5 threes a game guy. He's not 26 points on a true shooting of 61% type of a player with that elite free throw percentage volume as well. So there's some things that can drop off here with Julius. I think he probably can be a top 100 or top 70 guy as we move forward, but this level of production from him is probably going a little bit too far. And the last one I want to talk about is Jonas Valanciunas of the Memphis Grizzlies. Valanciunas is a guy that I like quite a bit, 43rd over the last 2 weeks in 26 minutes, averaging 18 and 10, 68 and 88. Both of those percentages are high. He's a good free throw shooter. 68 from the field is obviously pretty high. But I worry about what happens with this Grizzlies team. Do they start to just knock a couple of minutes off JV, give a couple of extra to Brandon Clark? He's had injury concerns in his past as well. And if that level of efficiency drops, and we've seen him be all over the shop this year. He is 62nd over the course of the season. I think he probably could be maybe top 80, top 90 as we move forward. But any sort of top 50 guy you can get back in exchange for JV with the potential downward trajectory of his season, that's just speculation. That's how I see it, though. I think I'd be looking to do that with Jonas Valanciunas. That'll do it for me today on this Sell High mini episode. Don't forget, so you never miss an episode, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube. Give me a thumbs up, leave a comment, share it with your friends, all of that good stuff, guys. We are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.